right, ready to dive in to a place that, well, let's just say it sparks a lot of opinions.
Oh, yeah.
Benidorm.
Okay.
We're talking towering hotels, endless beaches, and a reputation for having a really good time.
Mm-hmm.
You've probably heard it all, the good, the bad, and the wait seriously.
Right.
But trust me, there's so much more to Benidorm than meets the eye.
What's fascinating about Benidorm is that it's often brushed aside as this superficial holiday spot, but beneath the surface, it reflects massive global changes.
Okay.
Tourism, sure, but also social shifts and even the future of cities.
And we're lucky enough to have the perfect guide for this deep dive.
Oh, yeah.
You're about to hear insights from sociologist Mario Gaviria, who spent decades unraveling the enigma that is Benidorm. We've got this incredible 2012 interview with him, and let me tell you, he holds nothing back.
Now, Gaviria isn't just an academic with a research paper. He's got this almost personal fascination with Benidorm.
Really?
His story starts back in the early 1970s, right at the peak of the city's boom.
Early 1970s. Wow. That's like witnessing the birth of Benidorm as we know it.
Yeah.
He wasn't just reading about it in some dusty archive. He was living it.
Exactly. And that's what makes Gaviria's insights so valuable. He wasn't just studying tourism as a concept. He was watching it reshape a city in real time and, by extension, reshape European society.
Wow.
He wasn't just observing, he was involved. He even talks about how he got pulled into a major research project there.
Okay, hold on. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of his research, you have to tell me about this research grant. I read that and nearly spilled my coffee. €1 million for one project. Back then, it sounds more like a spy thriller than sociology research.
I know, right? Seriously. Gaviria received this grant from the Foundation March, a prestigious institution in Spain, to study the ecological impact of new cities designed around tourism. Interesting enough, but then he casually mentions that, adjusted for inflation, it was the equivalent of over €1 million today.
You're kidding? What was he doing, building a research institute on the beach?
Well, he did have a team of 40 people. He doesn't spill all the budget details, but it's clear this was a massive undertaking, and it allowed him to truly understand Benidorm's inner workings.
So we're talking about a hands-on sociologist, someone who wasn't afraid to roll up his sleeves and get a little sand between the pages, which makes his whole love story with Benidorm even more intriguing.
It really does. He talks about starting with this reluctance, this almost academic disdain for the idea of falling in love with a place. But then, decades later, he admits to understanding it completely.
Okay, that's incredible. This esteemed sociologist, drawn to a place for research, ends up entangled in its story.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, how did this experience shape his view of Benidorm? And, more importantly, what can we learn from his unique perspective? So we've got Gaviria, this sociologist who's fallen head over heels for Benidorm right in the thick of it during its boom years.
Right.
And he comes out with some bold claims. Like, he actually calls it one of the best new cities in Europe in the 1970s.
Yeah.
Was he blinded by the sunshine and sangria, or is there something more to it?
Here's where understanding the context of Gaviria's perspective is crucial. It's the early 70s, and his earlier work focused on social class, the environment, and how those intersected, especially in urban planning. He wasn't approaching Benidorm as just another vacation spot. He was looking at it through the lens of his expertise.
Which, let's be honest, social class and urban planning aren't exactly the first things that come to mind when you think of Benidorm. Yeah. It's all beaches, nightlife, and, well, you know.
Exactly. But Gaviria saw this deeper connection. He recognized that Benidorm's success was deeply intertwined with Europe's post-war boom. Think about it. Working-class families suddenly had vacation time and disposable income, but they weren't millionaires.
So Benidorm becomes this escape, a chance for everyone to experience a little slice of paradise.
Precisely. It was affordable freedom materialized in concrete, steel, and sunshine. Gaviria even calls it a materialization of the welfare state, which at first glance sounds a little strange, right?
Yeah, welfare state doesn't exactly scream beach vacation. Explain that one to me.
So Gaviria's argument is that affordable vacations were a vital part of the social contract of that era. It wasn't just about economics, it was about social harmony. Remember, this is post-World War II. Europe needed a way to rebuild, to boost morale, and to create a sense of shared prosperity.
And Benidorm, with its high-density, low-cost model, was the perfect solution.
Absolutely. And here's where it gets even more fascinating. Gaviria noticed something else during this time. He points out that back then, most of the Mediterranean southern coast was Islamic, and he observed that there wasn't much tourism in those countries at the time.
Which, compared to the bustling scene in Spain, would have been a stark contrast. What did he make of that difference?
Gaviria connects it back to the idea of the European welfare state. He suggests that because those Muslim-majority countries didn't have the same demand for mass affordable tourism, their tourism industries developed quite differently. It's a really insightful observation about how cultural and religious contexts can influence something as universal as tourism.
It makes you wonder how much those early differences shapes the tourism landscape we see today.
It's a question worth pondering, and it highlights just how perceptive Gaviria was back in the 70s. He was already identifying trends and making connections that would become even more significant in the decades to come.
He was ahead of the curve. So he sees this connection between tourism and social structures. But Gaviria doesn't shy away from Benidorm's complexities, does he? Okay, so we've established that Gaviria sees Benidorm as this fascinating product of its time, but he's not afraid to call out its flaws.
Right.
He points out how the city hasn't always aged gracefully, neglecting public spaces and becoming a little too reliant on those comfortable tourists.
Yeah, it's true. Gaviria's critique gets to the heart of a difficult balancing act that many tourist destinations face. He uses this phrase, lack of complexity, to describe what he sees happening in Benidorm.
Lack of complexity. Okay, break that down for me. What does he mean by that?
Well, he's suggesting that Benidorm became so good at delivering a specific kind of vacation experience that it might have sacrificed some of its soul along the way. Think about it. If you're catering to a very specific type of tourist, you might end up neglecting other aspects of your city, things like cultural attractions, local businesses, a more diverse range of things to see and do.
So it's like Benidorm became a one-trick pony.
In a sense, yes. And Gaviria argues that this laser focus on one type of tourism came at a cost.
And who paid the price for those cheap and cheerful vacations? Was it just the tourists who missed out on a more authentic experience?
Well, Gaviria points to the local families who, ironically, were the ones who helped build Benidorm's wealth. He suggests that as the city became synonymous with mass tourism, it struggled to attract other industries and demographics. Younger generations might have felt they had to move elsewhere to find work or opportunities, creating this demographic imbalance.
That's a heartbreaker.
Yeah.
This vision of a place almost becoming a victim of its own success, unable to hold on to the very people who made it thrive.
He contrasts Benidorm with Barcelona's tourism boom. Barcelona experienced a massive influx of tourists, but it managed to integrate that growth with a more diverse economy and a richer cultural scene. Gaviria seems to be implying that Benidorm, despite its successes, missed out on some crucial opportunities to diversify.
It's a cautionary tale. Be careful what you wish for sometimes. Getting exactly what you think you want can have unintended consequences.
Yeah, it definitely raises some tough questions. Is Gaviria being overly critical? Could an outsider, someone who hasn't experienced Benidorm firsthand, misinterpret his observations? After all, the city remains incredibly popular, and it clearly fulfills a need for many people.
Right, and that's what makes Gaviria's perspective, that of a sociologist who has spent decades observing, analyzing, and yes, even loving this city, so crucial. We can't just impose our own judgments on Benidorm. We need to understand its nuances, the trade-offs, the human stories woven into its fabric. It's a place that challenges our assumptions about tourism, about urban development, even about what makes a city good or bad.
Definitely. And that's why exploring Benidorm through Gaviria's eyes has been so fascinating. He gives us this new lens through which to view not just this one city, but the very idea of tourism and its impact on our world.
It reminds us that there's always more than meets the eye. Whether it's a bustling city, a quiet town, or even just a snapshot in time, we need to look deeper, question our assumptions, and consider the perspectives of those who have lived and breathed those experiences. So the next time you hear someone dismiss a place as just a tourist trap, remember Benidorm and the valuable lessons it offers. There might be a much more complex and even inspiring story waiting to be uncovered.